Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And we are finishing off the Philosophy Tube A Man Plagiarised My Work video, which had very little to do with plagiarism and an awful lot about feminist theory that doesn't have any backing or logic behind it to make it even worth responding to properly, and yet I'm doing 3 parts on it. So if you haven't seen the last 2 parts, I suggest you go watch them, and we will just jump in to the final slog of this frankly sloppy video. So, take it away, Philosophy Tube. He's doing some sort of skit, just go along with it, he's making points within it.
There really is no place like home. And I hope you don't mind me saying, English women really are the most beautiful in the world.
Again, it's a skit, he's playing a character, I don't know what this bit's about, really. The whole skit starts off with him reading a newspaper about a woman's refuge being burnt down, then he says he's a travelling salesman, and that he's back to vote, and I don't really get what Philosophy Tube's going for here, but he does actually start making points in this part, so I will address them.
You know, it's interesting. In my experience, selling to women is easier than selling to men. Most of my clients are men, but selling to females is so much simpler because you're more intelligent.
No, it's been pretty well studied in psychology that the gap between men and women in terms of intelligence, especially on average, is effectively nil. That's certainly true for general intelligence, though there are particular subtypes of intelligence, emotional intelligence, even though I don't particularly like that subcategory. But women tend to do better on verbal intelligence tests, and men tend to do better on spatial intelligence tests. There is clearly differences between the average man and woman on intelligence, but in general intelligence, no, they're pretty much the same. And either way, I don't know why selling to an intelligent person would necessarily be easier than a non-intelligent person. It just seems like a really weird line to throw in there, but I think it leads into the next point.
I don't need to flatter you. You already know the value of a good deal. The petrol I sell burns hot enough to sear flesh from bone in seconds.
Again, I don't really get this. The title of the chapter is Oh God, He's Back, and I've just had a quick look through Philosophy Tube's old videos. I have no idea what Oh God, He's Back means. I can't find this guy, and I'm not spending half a day looking for him. I don't know who this character is, I don't get why he's implying that he is involved in this burning down of a woman's refuge, so I'm just going to try and stick to the points. So it's probably going to look like this chapter's all over the place. There was a running narrative through it. I'm just skipping to the good parts.
Of course, the other reason I came back was to vote. There's an election coming up, and I think women are going to be the deciders.
I genuinely think that's going to be true. Economically, pretty much every party is pushing the same platform, more post-Keynesianism, so expect more fudging of economic data to hide the fact that we have one of the worst economies in the developed world. But anyway, we're on culture war stuff here, and culture war is probably going to be something that decides it for people. Why are loads of people not going to vote for the Tories next year? In part because they are carrying on with their economic orthodoxy that put them in this mess in the first place, and secondly, because what are they actually trying to do to help the culture war in any way? Migration, highest it's ever been. They are doing the bare minimum to try and control that, and they can't even get the Rwanda plan off the ground, quite literally. Okay, they've got a plan to cut legal migration by about 300,000, but that's nowhere near enough. The promise was tens of thousands every time they've been voted in. They're nowhere near getting back to the tens of thousands. We still have the Equality Act. They were the ones that brought in gay marriage, and they seemed very, very happy about that fact. Penny Mordaunt was writing to the Archbishop of Canterbury saying, please at the General Synod, bless gay marriages now, which, by the way, directly goes against pretty much everything the Bible teaches. In short, the only thing that the Tory party actually seem to be decent on, and that Labour have started actually moving towards, is women's spaces. When it comes to the culture war, the leftists want them open to anyone who says they're a woman, and the people opposite them, who are in mainstream society, are obviously very much on the you're only allowed to come into these spaces if you have a vagina, which obviously makes a lot more sense than the if you say you're a woman, you are a woman. Again, I brought up the Oxford English Dictionary in the first part. A woman is an adult human female. There is no getting around that. The trans activists are simply wrong. And so, since that's the only issue where there seems to be actually any meaningful difference between the parties, that could actually be a way of people to vote differently. Though, obviously, there's also a lot of voter apathy with the Tories at the moment because they've been in power for 13 years and they have not improved anything from the looks of things. So people will probably vote Labour just to see something different. I would suggest you vote Reform, as it sends a better signal than Labour coming in with a stonking majority, because obviously the Tories will go, oh, Labour got in, we need to start copying them, rather than going, oh, our votes are going towards Reform, let's try and be more like them. That's obviously the better signal.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. To my mind, women's issues are at the forefront. I mean, just look at what's going on. Nurses striking, teachers striking, carers striking, all the jobs women want to be doing, ground to a halt by unions. I mean, how can a woman stand on her own 2 feet without being patronized by state handouts if she can't even get a job?
Well, that is an argument that I have never heard in my life before, because during these strikes, the unions will pay the members who are striking in a strike pay package so that they aren't losing out on the money they would be making if they were working. So they are still holding down a job. So if I were you, I'd do your research on that. I mean, literally, again, this took 2 seconds to search. I can't believe how lazy Philosophy Tube is being. So you can apply for strike benefit. To receive strike benefit, you must have been be a paid member of the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, when you took part in strike action. You cannot claim strike benefit if you were in arrears, which is just if you haven't paid your RCN money, with your RCN membership when you're on strike. This is because the strike benefit is part of your membership benefits. Have taken part in a strike action for a full shift at an employer where the strike action was formally called, and have had your pay deducted due to striking and be able to show us evidence of this. So yeah, this is just a total straw man. Public unions that are striking, their members still get paid to strike. It's one of the incentives of joining the unions, because you can literally just get paid to not work by the union.
I mean, besides turning up on a dinghy with 5 children in tow, in which case you'll probably get a 5-star hotel.
Typically there were 4-star hotels, but yes, that is pretty ridiculous. I mean, for a start, the main complaint about the dinghies is that most of them seem to not be women, and instead seem to be single men who are not bringing along their families. I don't think many people would have too much of an issue if they were genuinely coming over with families, but the vast majority don't seem to be doing that. In fact, in 2022, out of about 90,000 applications for asylum in the UK, 77% of that were men. And while that does include children, only 18% were men, so we don't have the exact breakdown, but if we take 18% of that to be children, and bear in mind an awful lot of those men were lying about being children on their applications, when it comes to women coming over on dinghies with their family, it makes up barely anyone coming over on dinghies, because bear in mind, a lot of those women in 2022 and children will have come from Ukraine via legal routes. So to be honest with you, it's completely silly to try and make out that people coming over on boats are mainly women with children, because that's just not the case. The vast majority of them are men. That is the problem. Because not only that, they are also coming from a safe country, so there's absolutely no reason to accept their asylum claim, but we have an incredibly weak infrastructure when it comes to defending our own borders and when it comes to the asylum system.
But what about a woman like you, who was born here? What chance do you have?
I mean, it's a point I bring up constantly throughout my life. I think, even including my parents bringing me up, I think I've probably been a net taxpayer to the system, because just to be totally straight with you, I went to a private school. So that means not only were my parents paying for my education, they were paying for a space for someone else's, due to the fact that out of their taxes, that goes towards education. So already there, that's doubly a net taxpayer. And secondly, the only thing I've actually got out of this government throughout my life is visiting the NHS. And in total, I think I've been to an NHS hospital for my own problems about 3 times. And they were for quite small scale things. One was a problem with my finger, the other 2 times were problems with my ankle and toe. And of course, you can probably include the vaccines in that, but point being, I've been a net taxpayer in the UK for 6 years now, and the main way that I would be a net drain on the system is by going to a state school, which I didn't. But then you see these people who aren't even British citizens coming over on a dinghy, being rescued by the RNLI, which is their job to, that's fine. But then these people are put up in hotels, given money for food and entertainment by the government, which is all at my expense. And it does make you think, hang on, I was born here, why are they getting more than me? Upon what planet is it fair that they come over on a dinghy, break a law by default via coming to our country illegally, and then they appear to get rewarded? I mean, luckily I've not lived in a place where there's been problems with asylum seekers, but from what all the people at the Lotus Eaters say, they have to live in Swindon where there are plenty of these asylum seekers staying, and they don't seem to be doing an awful lot of good. And don't get me wrong, I've known asylum seekers who have helped out in the community and done their part. If all asylum seekers were like that, that'd be great. But it appears that that is actually the minority. So one thing I can get from this character of Philosophy Tubes is that he is supposed to be almost the straw man of right-wing thought. It's the person who, say, has all the easy answers or tries to get you into your non-compassionate side. Well, to be quite honest with you, there are people out there that don't deserve compassion. People using the system that is supposed to help refugees in a very cynical manner are absolutely the type of people that you should hold with complete contempt, and you should not feel bad for doing that.
I think this government has utterly failed British women.
I don't know, in a fairly short space of time, we've had more women MPs in the cabinets than we have in the past, and we've had 2 female prime ministers. That's pretty good. If anything, it keeps focusing on being too gynocentric, if you ask me, but that doesn't mean that there aren't problems that women face. And feeling safe in single-sex spaces, I mean, that's just obviously a thing that should be protected. If everywhere was a private institution, you'd probably see that implemented universally. Unfortunately, we have this thing called the Equality Act, and there is a huge debate as to whether single-sex spaces break that law or not. Of course, if I was in power at the moment, I'd just completely get rid of that law, along with pretty much everything else that Blair brought in. But unfortunately, we don't live in my perfect world.
Oh, you're surprised to hear me say that, are you? No, I see it in your face. That's quite all right. I am often mistaken for a conservative. And truth be told, I have friends who lean that way.
I mean, you got to bear in mind that something like 42% of women voted Tory in 2019. There's not this huge differential between men and women when it comes to voting intentions. There's a bit of a gap, but it's not as large as, say, the difference between age groups. Because there is no doubt in my mind that this is down in part to the education system and to social media, but so many young people have just all the complete wrong opinions, and it's in part probably due to Philosophy Tube putting out this dross. I mean, you don't get 1.5 million subscribers and don't influence the current political and cultural zeitgeist in some way. Because it was only something like 20% of people aged 18 to 24 voted Tory in the last election in 2019, which actually did include me now that I think about it. I think I was 23 at the time. But obviously as the age goes up, you get a larger and larger cohort voting Tory, whereas the young people, all, pretty much all anyway, progressive, because most of the young people voting Tory are hyper-progressive, wanting more LGBT Tories and more protections for women, etc., etc. You're barely finding young conservatives anymore. I'm in a minority of about 10 people. And I see this as a problem because I see pretty much every progressive party, institution and policy just ruining a country that I see as a place that needs to be protected for future generations to succeed. Because what we're doing at the moment is not going to make a successful society. But the implication from this bit that Philosophy Tube is doing makes it out that this character is one of those types who says they aren't a far-right person when really they are. And at the end of the day, it is just supposed to be a straw man of someone who says, don't be compassionate ever, when That's not the reasoning. That is not what anyone says. What they say is you need to be more compassionate about your countrymen, obviously, before we have to deal with the world. And allowing infinity immigrants or completely changing basic definitions that humankind have known since day zero, that is not going to improve anything, obviously.
But I've always tried to reach out a hand to the salt of the earth, industrious native sons of England. This current crop of conservatives are obsessed with finance. Dirty business, international banking, filthy, corrupting affair. No. Governance should be about securing your people.
What is the point of having a nationwide government that governs that country if it is not going to do the bare minimum and protect the body politic of that country? What is the point? And even then, the reasoning for getting involved in international finance and international business is to protect the country. It's to increase the economy, the GDP line go up type of economic finance of the country. And they still say that's to improve the country. It's not for anyone else. It's just that the unintended consequence is that you have foreign businesses owning pretty much all the utilities in the UK. You have ended up strangleholding the entirety of every single important industry so that only the established corporations can make money within those industries. It pushes out competition. You've got no entrepreneurship. Britain can't grow as a result. And that's why you've ended up having stagnant wages for so long. Not to mention the immigrants pouring in, of course, is keeping those wages stagnant. But really, the issue with immigration is the cultural side. You are seeing a changing face of Britain. Barely anyone I know goes to London and comes back saying, yeah, that was an English city. They always say a euphemism for it's a globalist city or it's an international city, it's metropolitan, etc. And a lot of the natives of the UK are seeing that happen and wanting a pushback against it, but the Tories aren't doing anything to help that. And if you think Labour's going to help that, I've got a bridge to sell you. And when it comes to reform, I think they'll do their best, but ultimately not do very much when it comes to actually pushing back against these cultural problems. Because the blob is just that powerful.
Letting them preserve a future for their families, their children. And who's securing the women of Britain? Women's prisons aren't even safe anymore.
This is reminding me of when modern writers are writing a villain, and the villain is actually very, very much the good guy of the story. Because the straw man is just that ridiculous. The Everton window for many writers is that far to the left, that literally very normal takes and people are seen as these supervillains. Because again, he brings up a very good and real point. Trans woman guilty of raping 2 women remanded in female prison in Scotland. And there are plenty of more stories like this. There should never, ever be a male in a female prison. But this is the type of thing that Philosophy Tube wants. Because if society cannot accept that anyone who says they're a woman is not a woman, then Philosophy Tube can never be a woman. And so many women in jails may be raped, but that is a sacrifice that Philosophy Tube is willing to make.
If I were a policeman, I'd feel awful sending a woman away in handcuffs.
Again, I don't really get what this straw man is supposed to be representing. I don't know anyone that doesn't want women put in prisons if they break the law. If anything, I think most people want more prisons built, just not in their backyard, to house more people who break the law, and this will, of course, include women.
The policing of language in this country is beyond parody.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty much true. Count Dankula's the obvious example. The police keep turning up at doors for jokes being made on Facebook and Twitter. Obviously, it's beyond parody. Nobody should be turning up at your door for something that you've posted on Twitter, unless, of course, it's a direct death threat.
I mean, look here. It's not a women's shelter anymore. It's a shelter for vulnerable people.
Yes, I'm not going to lie, most of the time if a woman is going to a women's shelter, that is because that they have recently been abused, more than likely, by a man. So it's only natural that they're going to want to be in a single-sex space, and I don't think this would be too much of an issue if it was just 1 or 2 women's shelters turning into a unisex shelter or allowing trans women into them. But the problem is that it's an awful lot of them. I don't think it's all of them, but it is certainly a lot of the high-profile ones that are doing that, and as you go into now...
And that's the real tragedy. But the name, that's the critical thing. If women can't express yourselves with the word woman, then what do you have? You'll be a A gestator? A birthing person? A surrogate?
Yes, and a lot of women find these very insulting as terms to describe them. They like the word woman as the catch-all for that. Why do you think when women can no longer give birth or after they go through menopause, they feel like less of a woman? That is the description they will typically go with. It's because your typical woman can give birth, gestates, has periods, is pumped full of estrogen and hormones that does make them more nurturing, more caring and more compassionate than men. And sure, you can pump these hormones within yourself to seem more womanly, but that is never going to make you a woman, and people are getting to the point they are fed up of having these terms completely redefined for this very, quite frankly, experimental treatment that people are going through. We don't know if it works, we just know that they are slightly happier after they have gone through some sort of transition, and most trans people don't even go all the way. Most just take the hormones. Most don't get any sort of surgery. And if you ask me, that is exactly like just letting a drug addict keep taking his drugs. I don't think it's helpful. The drug abuser will be happy taking his drugs, but it is not the healthy option. It is not the meaningful option. It is not furthering society in any positive direction. So I don't see why we shouldn't start finding alternatives to this treatment. And I certainly don't think we should be redefining terms we have known since the beginning of time just to make a vast minority of the population happy. And this isn't some utilitarian argument, but there is a point where if the entirety of society is being dictated to by a minority at the expense of a vast number of people's ability to actually live their life in some sort of comfort, then obviously you're going to have some sort of revolt. And it's best to try and avoid that.
We need strong women. We need women who aren't afraid to stand up. We need women who can stay cool when the heat is on.
Yep, and that apparently wasn't Liz Truss, but it's very likely it could be Kemi Badenoch. And I wouldn't be shocked if that is the type of woman that Philosophy Tube is referencing. I mean, just look at the way Kemi Badenoch handles being accused of just an outright lie. I'm just going to play the whole clip, because it's great.
And you've also made these statements using inflammatory language that likens children and young people coming out as trans to the spread of a disease.
I've never said that. That is a lie.
Well,
that is a lie. And I think you should withdraw that statement. That is a lie. You are lying. You are lying.
I'm not lying to you.
You are lying. I have never ever used the word disease. And I think this is exactly what I'm talking about. You are making statements in a select committee that are untrue.
You've just called me a liar.
Can I just remind the Minister that is unparliamentary
right.
language?
What she has said is not true. It's not true.
I mean, I'd honestly recommend watching the rest of that clip. Kemi Badenoch does seriously handle herself when under the heat of a parliamentary select committee that's just outright lied about her. Yeah, Kemi Badenoch goes on to ask, when have I described the spread of transgenderism in kids as a disease? Which, to be honest with you, a few paediatric psychologists have described it as effectively just replacing bulimia or other mental health issues, especially with young girls. And typically it does come in waves, so you're seeing a peak to this point, and it's probably going to die down over the next few years as, ironically, Clown Decade comes to an end. But Kemi Badenoch is actually a lot wiser with her words than I, so when it comes to being accused of using inflammatory language on this topic, yeah, she just calls out, no, that's a lie, and while that isn't parliamentary language, and instead replaces she is a liar with she is not telling the truth about me, she goes on to ask, can you give evidence of where I have said this? And of course the select committee member has absolutely none. Honestly, go watch the rest of the clip, it's a lot better than this Philosophy Tube video.
I had my work stolen by a man.
No, as I went through in the first part, you have absolutely no evidence of that. You are saying that you can't give evidence of that as it may bring up a libel case, and the only reason you would even mention libel laws is if you were lying. Because the largest offence of a libel cases in the UK is the fact that the person accused of libel was in fact telling the truth. So as long as you can make these claims and back them up with evidence, there is absolutely no reason that you should fear libel, but you do, so I can only assume that you are lying.
And I went on a journey to understand it.
No, you didn't. You went on a journey to make a video to give more claptrap of complete feminist nonsense, and then you went on a journey to just bash Roger Scruton by lying about what he said, and then you move on to informing people that suffragettes joined fascists because they wanted to bash women and force them to be domestic servants, when the reality of the fact is that the fascists wanted the exact opposite. The BUF actually had policies that will have effectively been feminist because they wanted everyone to work for the state. So, again, just a complete lie. This entire video has been you lying. Hence I thought it was important to finish off this series, because it's important people know that there has barely been any truthful statements throughout this entire video made by PhilosophyTube.
In Chapter 1, we learned that social constructs, like woman and the family, are also economic constructs.
What do you mean, woman is an economic construct? And you weren't saying it is in fact an economic construct at the time. You were saying that it was invented by men or patriarchs to be something that they could control. Then now try and change the tune and say it's just an economic unit.
Misogyny tries to justify making women's access to resources precarious.
That has indeed been the case in the past, but you did not go into it. You did not go into how women could only have a bank account from about 1950 or something. And even then, at the start of it, it was only married women that could do that. You didn't even really go into the pay gap that deeply. You started going on about witch hunts for some reason. It was all very confusing. Did you make one video, make this conclusion, and then remake the video to bring in the plagiarism? And then in the conclusion, forgot what you said in part 1? Is that what's happened here?
And that has shaped much of the way my country is today.
What do you mean women make the vast majority of consumer decisions? The gender pay gap is effectively in line with the amount of hours worked. You see women absolutely everywhere today. I don't know why you're trying to claim that absolutely no progress has been made in terms of women's economic freedom. I don't know why you're trying to imply there's been no progress between the 19th century and now.
Often in far more violent and racialized ways than the comparatively mild form that I experienced.
I do find it interesting that PhilosophyTube here has assumed that it's misogyny rather than transphobia that caused this, especially with the amount of references that PhilosophyTube has put in here to make reference to the fact that he doesn't have a uterus and isn't actually a female, despite PhilosophyTube's claims that PT is a woman.
And that's all really good to know, because it's applicable beyond just my case.
Are we about to have a section that should have been in the first part? Because again, it still blows my mind that witch hunting was brought up as if it was some patriarchal way to oppress women, when, again, it was mainly other women accusing women of being witches out of petty revenge.
Maybe that guy didn't steal my work because I'm a woman. Maybe he just does that to everybody.
PhilosophyTube has this very, very annoying habit of going through an entire video, making one particular narrative and then completely undermining that narrative right in the conclusion. And that is exactly what has happened here. Yes, maybe this guy is not very good at keeping his word to anyone. Maybe he didn't do it because you're trans or you pass well enough to be a woman in his eyes or something like that. Maybe he is just a bad person to the general population and not just to you for any particular group he perceives you to be in. And the fact that you have brought this up and not said he did it because he thinks I'm a woman completely undermines the whole point you've made in this video. You could have had lots of decent and concrete bits of evidence to say that women have been oppressed in the past, and even made some sort of a through line to say, and we're still seeing the result of it today, but you didn't do that. You came up with a load of nonsense about witch hunting and colonialism in the first part. You then had a go at Roger Scruton exclusively in the second part, and the third part was coming out with the complete wrong conclusion that women only vote in the way they do to get back at other women, than rather coming away with the correct conclusion with that fascism is a type of progressivism. And now you've just undermined the whole narrative you were pretending you had throughout the video by saying, oh, I don't even know if this guy is a misogynist or just a bad person in general. Absolutely crazy thing to say at this point.
But still, by thinking through what happened to me, I've learned that experiences like that are produced by the kind of society in which we live.
The most recent example you could come up with was housewives in the 50s. That was the best you could do. And I've been through this in an Ash Sarkar video as well, but there are still people who lived through that time period, and the women who were housewives were very happy with their lives. And there are plenty of clips of old feminists who never got families saying basically they're depressed in their old age because at the end of the day, all they produced was a political movement that is going to be lost in the books of history, and they don't have anyone to look after them, anyone who's going to remember them, and they've not been able to form as stronger bonds as they would be able to if they had a family. Exactly as Roger Scruton says in How to Be a Conservative, having a family is the best way to create these incredibly strong and fulfilling human bonds that will carry on throughout the rest of human history. But I suppose if you're not planning to have a family at all, it's not too much of a surprise that you can't see that argument for what it is, which is a almost mythological narrative that goes out throughout humankind. This is exactly what his father was saying, in fact. You are simply part of history. You need to be inspired by said history to write your own stories within it. And a really good way to do that is within your own family, to create your own family narrative. Everyone sees it within their own families, I can see it within mine, and I think it would be incredibly selfish for me to end it at my part of the bloodline. Granted, I have brothers and sisters too, but they're going to go off and make their own family stories and I will make mine, and it will all be influenced by our parents and whatever third parties influence us as well. In my case, it is very much men like Churchill, men like Sir Francis Drake, men like Wellington, women as well, of course, like Margaret Thatcher and Queen Victoria, and I'm sure the list goes on ad infinitum. And I think that's a sad part of being a year zeroist progressive. You have no one to look back on and be inspired by. You can only act on your own instincts. You are very much similar to some sort of animal that can only act on its own instincts. The only advantage you have is that you are smart enough to rationalise your own instincts, which can then fill up this religion and group identity shaped hole you have in yourself, and it's why you end up thinking you can completely redefine terms that we have known since the start of mankind, and why you think you're doing good in the world, because you're thinking, well, I feel happy, maybe if I push what makes me feel happy, it will make other people feel happy. I'm sorry, I just don't think I have the temerity within myself to think that I know what is best for humankind. I think it is my job to help maintain the moral framework that has been made over the millennia within this country so that people and future generations of this country can enjoy the freedoms and societies that it is brought about by it. I'm sorry you see it as something to tear down, but if you do, you have no place within the public sphere to influence that. And luckily, from the way election goes, it appears that most people agree with me rather than you.
In Chapter 2, we saw that there is an alternate response. To refuse to learn anything ever!
Oh my god, the irony of that sentence given the things that you read out in that chapter. Again, part 2 is entirely just leftist projection from Philosophy Tube. It's not even really worth retreading beyond that.
And in Chapter 3, we saw that that can be appealing.
Oh, can it now? That's funny. I would never have got that idea from the way you have presented yourself throughout this video.
Rather than confront our oppression, women could feel excitement and superiority as enforcers of oppression against other women.
You really didn't go through in that chapter exactly how that would come about, because at no point did you even try and claim that the women who were within the fascist ranks wouldn't also put themselves under the same oppression, but again, you just lied about that anyway. Even Wikipedia covered the British Union of Fascist Policies to bring equality between men and women and end the practice of firing women for getting pregnant. But again, I guess you needed Roger Scruton in that chapter too to say, oh, he's the type of guy who makes up history, even though at no point do you actually bring up any historical points he makes. You just say, oh, his dad said something about history being dynamic, I think, which, again, he didn't, to frankly just deflect from the fact that you have just made up history within this video yourself. It's unbelievable how much projection has oozed out of this video from you, PT.
Trouble is, only a tiny number of women can actually do that.
And in the more direct cases in the modern day, it's men pretending to be women that do that.
Roger Scruton tried to build a movement of British pride and national identity, but I couldn't be a part of that even if I wanted to, because he based it on made-up history to deliberately exclude people like me.
Okay, you really need to give me some details on why you think that. There are certainly people on the further right than Roger Scruton who definitely would have excluded you for being degenerate, but I really need some more direct quotes from Roger Scruton that effectively come down to saying trans people are not allowed in my movement or to be a conservative. He would certainly have said that it is hypocritical of you because you have to be incredibly progressive to even begin to join in with the trans radical activist movement. But I don't think he'd exclude anyone. I think he'd be perfectly fine with people who are trying to forward traditional values and bring out traditional policies and enforce them. The thing is, you're never going to want that anyway, so it's a pointless hypothetical.
This whole journey made me reflect a lot on my country and how I often feel like I'm on the outside of it.
Well, I'm not going to lie, you're a revolutionary. That is why you feel like you're on the outside. And to be honest, you should feel like you're on the outside as a revolutionary, because you should be rejected by the country. It is up to the country and its people to continue its traditional values. And if you want to completely revolutionise that, not even just redefining women, but bringing forward all sorts of progressive policies, of course that's going to be rejected by a country that really at the end of the day does try and be as traditional as possible. We have had 2 decades at the very least of being incredibly progressive. It's time we actually put a stop to that and really rediscover how good traditional values can be for our country and the people and families within it. And if you don't want to be a part of that, fine, go away then. You'll probably be more accepted over in America, especially in Hollywood, since you're a writer. You'll probably be given a green light overnight to write a film because you're trans. It just makes sense for you. I don't know why you want to stay here. You don't even appreciate your own parents and the work they put in to raise you, so of course you're not going to appreciate the country that did the same thing either.
I like being from the UK. I think parts of my country are very pretty. I think the people are interesting and complicated. We invented Shakespeare and sea shanties, and the food is much better than anyone will tell you.
It's so annoying. It's always these really surface level things that people say they like about Britain, but then when you get any deeper than that, it's, oh no, that's bad. Well, guess what? You can't have these things without the traditions in place to make them. You think you'd get Shakespeare in a progressive society? Give me a break. It's on the same level of saying being British is when you drink tea. It's like, yeah, that's a part of it, but there's so much more deep things we can talk about. I do have to say, though, it is very ironic how one point made in the fascist part of this video was that effectively you can make up an entire history and politics as long as the aesthetics are good, and everything just mentioned by Philosophy Tube there is in some way in aesthetics. That's all they are. That's why I'm saying it's very surface level. If Philosophy Tube actually dipped into William Shakespeare's actual political and moral compass, I think Philosophy Tube would easily find the fact that Shakespeare, while he was somewhat progressive at the time, still had an awful lot of traditional values and probably would have mostly agreed with Roger Scruton.
But I'm not allowed to get married the same way a cis woman can without getting permission from a doctor first.
Yes, I agree. The NHS has gone way too far with this trans stuff. You brought it up with the weird arsonist guy. All these things need to be redefined. As Philosophy Tube has just said here, I like a lot of things about Britain. All these aesthetics. You look at the deeper stuff though, I want it completely revolutionised. So you want a completely different country. I don't know why you'd bother saying, I like the aesthetics, if everything underneath it you hate and want completely burnt down and rebuilt in your own image. As far as I'm concerned, get out of the country. You can look at photographs and you can watch Shakespeare plays. You don't have to be in Britain and part of British society to do that. And if you hate it this much, why are you still here? Go away. And this is the thing, I want the way current British politics is done somewhat completely changed. I always say, please can we burn down the civil service, but that's not a revolution, that is a counter-revolution. We've already seen the civil service grow to a point where it's just a bureaucratic mess, absolutely filled to the brim with people who are only there to make sure our unemployment numbers aren't through the roof. It is a siphon of taxpayer money to make sure that we don't have useless people being homeless. That's not to say every civil servant is useless. I'm sure there's plenty of talent in there, but I think the ones with their heads screwed on properly and want to take their life seriously are in the private sector actually trying to improve things there. And I wouldn't be surprised if most of Philosophy Tube's work is actually subsidised by the Ministry of Culture. But hey, look, this example is still silly as well. It's like when gay people say, oh, I can't get married. No, you could get married, it just had to be someone of the opposite sex. You can have a civil partnership, and either way, what would be the issue with being married as a male, Philosophy Tube? No one is going to know what is on that marriage certificate apart from you, your partner, and the witnesses. What is the issue with just continuing to say you're a woman, you're in a lesbian relationship? I mean, the only people who are going to believe you are people you care about anyway. Why do you care what other people think? And why do you need this official document to recognise this? I feel so strange that I'm one of the few people in the world that doesn't consider myself married just because a piece of paper from the government says it. I consider myself married when I make the vows in front of God to my wife. Because at the end of the day, it was always a religious institution, but now it's turned into a weird government status symbol for people. And that's probably why it's really easy to bastardise. But again, PhilosophyTube doesn't care about that. As far as PhilosophyTube is concerned, marriage is a status symbol that he needs to redefine so that he can get the status symbol he wants. Effectively, he's just going forward with a revolution because of the hell of it.
And it's a 20-year wait to see that doctor.
Yeah, well, as you said in that video, trans people lie to doctors anyway, so I don't really see your problem with lying about everything else. Just say you're a woman to the registrar. What are they going to do? Check. It's a 20-year waiting list to give you the go-ahead to say, yeah, you're a woman officially. Like, why would they bother checking?
Even to a woman with all of my privileges, sometimes it doesn't really feel like my country loves me back.
You don't love the country, you love some countryside, some nice plays, and you like some music that the country have made. Again, all aesthetical, fleeting things. You go any deeper, you want a complete redo of it. So when you say you don't feel it loves you back, well, that's because the things you love aren't the country. They are just secondary or tertiary results of the core of the country that you hate. So no wonder you feel it hates you back.
And what happens to me is mild cheddar in comparison to the extra-strength cheese awfulness my country inflicts on some women.
I need an example. I don't know who you are referring to in this way. I can only assume you're not referring to the poor women in the prisons who have been raped by trans women.
Scruton would tell me to just ignore all of that, but that doesn't really seem like a good deal.
Scruton wouldn't tell you to ignore anything. Scruton would just say this is all part of the British narrative. We change things slowly. We don't like revolutions. The last time there was any sort of major military revolution after the Civil War, it lasted 9 years, and Oliver Cromwell, after he was buried, was dug up again, paraded through towns, hung, beheaded, and his body parts were found in all different parts of the country hundreds of years later. He was completely hated. We hate revolution. We like seeing someone whose family goes all the way back through the millennia of other people who have sat on a big golden throne with a big golden crown with jewels encrusted on them, going around the country and visiting people and places to let people know that the story of Britain will always continue. So given you're a revolutionary, PhilosophyTube, it is no surprise that you feel like the country hates you. It's because it does. If you get your revolution, you will have your way for a few years, but then when you die, you will be absolutely desecrated. Because we are a country that likes to make change slowly and actually make improvements to the country. And the problem is that all the people have seen for the past few decades is a facade of that. It is slowly coming to people's realization that we have not been making improvements over the past 2 or 3 decades. We've been completely stagnant and gone through managed decline, and you are probably going to see a parliamentary election reflect that after Starmer has been in and made no improvements for a few years. So by all means, carry on trying to get the revolution. You will never get it. Thank goodness.
So since I do want to engage with reality,
I'm only going to start believing that when you are not trying to hide from libel laws that you wouldn't be affected by if you were telling the truth anyway, and when you stop lying about Roger Scruton, the suffragettes and the BUF. It's amazing how you're trying to hide the fact that the British Union of Fascists actually had progressive policies that you would agree with, because simply put, you don't want your audience to question their own beliefs. Whereas I don't really care if I agreed with the British Union Fascists on some policies. There's always going to be overlap with any fully grown political ideology, because all of them have to engage in reality somehow, and I like having politics that engages with reality.
my final question was, what can I do about misogyny? And I'm f***ed if I know.
Great. What a conclusion to a video. I can at least say this about my videos. When I go through a problem in one of my videos, I will at least try and give you some sort of thing you can do as a Joe Nobody, whether it's write to an MP, vote for someone else, get involved in your local communities in some way, do something like that. However, PhilosophyTube is going to say you can't do anything because the only way we can win is via total revolution, and therefore you need to prepare for a revolution. I would be shocked if that is not implied in some way.
I just got here. I'm not the president of women.
Again, it's the really funny part of both saying, I am a female, I'm a woman, and then at the same time actually acknowledging the fact that PhilosophyTube really isn't one. Again, PhilosophyTube has tried to say throughout this video, I try and engage in reality, And it's times like this where Philosophy Tube is engaging with reality, but then throughout most of the rest of it, will just lie to your face. And it's a bit of a bait and switch for the audience. It's say, haha, look, I'm engaging with reality, I'm not really a woman, ha ha ha. And then the rest of the time say, oh, but I am a woman though. And you can trust that because I have made it clear that I am self-aware that I'm not really. But I am really at the same time. And it's, how can you hold this internal contradiction throughout this video and still try and claim that you even care about the truth or reality? And, you know, not even to mention the Roger Scruton lies again.
Way back at the start, I cited a study saying that women do more housework than men. Well, the head researcher on that study had a few recommendations.
Oh my god, I can't wait to see what this says. Stop taking your money from your husbands and take it from the government instead? Go on, what's it gonna be?
She said that we need to raise awareness and think more about it. And I hear that sort of thing a lot. You know, raise awareness, have conversations.
Yeah, well, most of these academics are just involved in scams. They're in Ponzi schemes. Like, of course they're not going to give any real solutions to these problems because they're not really activists. They're activists insofar as they will make money off the studies they make and the ridiculous statements they make. They're very much like you, actually, Philosophy Tube. They will just bend the truth and outright lie about either their findings or the causes of these problems and things like that, and they'll make money from it. You know, they'll be invited to panel shows, they'll be invited to academic talks and paid for the pleasure of effectively just lying to audiences like this. Because, yes, it is true, women do more housework and chores than men do. However, I don't understand why that's a problem. Men do more of X, Y, Z, women do more of A, B, C. Who cares? Of course, their solution is just to talk about it and have conversations. They don't want an actual solution to it, otherwise the grift is over. And there's probably even a slight hint in their brain saying, there isn't actually a problem here, so just go along with the grift. You, however, Philosophy Tube, are a complete idiot and actually do want a revolution. We have quite literally had a bunch of boomer and millennial and Gen X grifters in universities that have accidentally made an entire generation of revolutionaries. And that's why, as I said before, there is such a stark difference between millennials and Zoomers' opinions and absolutely everyone else's. It's all unironically down to a few ideologues who have managed to make it a massive grift, and a very lucrative one at that.
What are some common myths about women that you wish men understood? Well, gosh, I wish men understood that we have the same number of teeth as they do.
Yep, I really don't care that Aristotle got that wrong. And the claim that he saw women as inferior and then just made up the fact that they had less teeth, I don't buy. I really do think he just listened to other people's observations from other animals and even from humans and just thought, I'll write it down, I trust their word. Because, again, unless you're a dentist, I don't think you will have ever done a study on how many teeth men and women have.
And I guess if we just raise awareness of that fact, then misogyny would end.
This is actually quite funny. I was just searching up men and women's teeth health because I thought, well, I can make a joke and say, well, women's teeth are better than men, so that must have helped in some way, but I've actually found out that due to biological differences, and despite women's better awareness of proper dental care, tooth decay is more common in women than men. And that is a result of lower saliva levels in women due to fluctuations in hormones, pregnancy, menses, birth control, and menopause. And saliva is one of the most important ways that your mouth is guarded against tooth-decaying bacteria. So in fact, instead of making a joke, I can just make another completely valid point and say, because you are not a woman, Philosophy Tube, that means you are more likely to have better health than the average woman when it comes to your teeth. It's just yet another sex difference between men and women that is very small scale, yet again just shows that you cannot turn from a male to a female. Even with estrogen, you may develop less saliva, but it will still not be to the same extent as your average woman.
As we saw with the women having fewer teeth thing, ignorance is a bit like CO2. It's pumped out because powerful people benefit from it. And as Roger Scruton showed, sometimes people will just make shit up if it feels good.
Broken record, I know, but once again, leftist projection, you're just making stuff up again, Philosophy Tube.
But because I was thinking about CO2, I remembered a philosopher called Andreas Malm, who wrote a book about climate change. And he says people have been raising awareness about that one for decades, but politicians still aren't doing nearly enough. So, he asks, at what point do we just sabotage fossil fuel infrastructure with our own hands?
Well, I'm not going to lie, I didn't expect climate cultism to come up in the conclusion here, and I certainly didn't expect... Well, no, actually, you know what? I did expect the do crime to save X, Y, or Z, or in the name of X, Y, or Z intersectional cause, because that the underlying reasoning in every single one of Philosophy Tube's conclusions. Also, I've just had a look. This is yet another Marxist that Philosophy Tube has read. All Philosophy Tube does is make stuff up and say read Marxists. That's all these videos ever turn out to be, and it gets incredibly tedious. Because once again, this has very little to do with the actual subject at hand. This entire video has not been about women, oppression, or anything like that. It's all been about, isn't the capitalist system evil? We need to completely destroy it. In other words, it's been a Marxist claptrap. And guess what? Constantly quoting people that say the exact same thing there, Philosophy Tube, just proves the point. But, well, I guess it's very lucrative. It's very capitalist of you, isn't it? A bit like Marx with Engels, I suppose the capitalist oppression of people is actually a very, very good thing when it's paying your own bills.
Hence the title of his book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. And I started wondering, how many more women need to be exploited, harassed, assaulted, murdered, before we just sabotage the machinery of patriarchy with our own hands?
Do you see what I mean? That exactly as I just said. This doesn't have anything to do with protecting women or facing up to reality. This has everything to do with tearing down the quote-unquote capitalist system, even though anyone who looks into it properly, we don't live in a capitalist system at all. It has capitalist aspects, there's certainly no doubt about that. We still have a market economy in quite a few industries. However, you look at cars, you look at housing, you look at most manufacturing, you even look at tech recently and AI, it's all regulated up to the eyeballs. The government says you can only be involved in these industries if you follow these very, very strict guidelines, and it just gets people like me saying, how are you supposed to innovate within these conditions? What a ridiculous thing to say. And also right now, you've got more women working than ever. You've got the birth rate in Britain as one of the lowest ever. We're seeing more women in Parliament than ever, more women within the Forbes 500 CEOs than ever before. Women are everywhere, and yet they are still somehow being oppressed. When in reality, women have never had it better. So while you're saying, oh, why are these oppressed women not having the mindset of they've got nothing to lose but their chains, revolutionising? And it's because most don't feel like they have chains. Most do feel free, and despite the fact that our economy is not doing anywhere near the level it should be doing, they still feel pretty good about their lives. They still feel they can get through life and they can live a fairly decent, happy and meaningful life. I'm sorry you don't feel that way and you want a complete revolution because of that, Philosophy Tube, but you are never ever going to convince women that they need to revolutionise the old system. This new system you're trying to bring in, where you're saying a woman is anyone who says they're a woman, now that is going to get a revolution, because people really don't like the fact that it is infringing on reality, classic human categories, and most of all, their own freedom.
I mean, what is the feminist equivalent of blowing up a pipeline?
Just killing men seems to be the answer to feminists that let their masks slip.
I really wish I knew the answer to that.
You've just gone through the answer. Your own answer is to tear down the capitalist system. The thing is that there's no direct targets like the oil industry and pipelines pumping oil through. In fact, what your direct answer would be is literally killing men, but you can't say that on a YouTube video, so you're not going to. But that is the implication behind it. And I don't think Philosophy Tube realises that.
I do see women taking smaller actions, though. Things that we can do now for ourselves, rather than waiting for an election to solve all of our problems.
My God, you're saying that women have been oppressed since the start of this system, which I guess in your mind would be from the mid-17th, possibly 16th century, when in reality most of humankind has been oppressed by nature itself. But my God, after all that time, you can't wait another year? Are you serious?
I'm an actress, and I'm in some group chats for women in the industry that we use to warn each other about predatory men and, where possible, inflict consequences on them.
Give me an example. Please give me an example. Or is this going to be another one of those stories you say, can't give you details because of libel laws? In other words, are you lying to me right now?
Now, in the UK, less than 2% of rapists end up being charged, and fixing that is going to require state investment.
Oh my God, I can't believe you brought up this completely defunct and, frankly, horrible statistic. This is a blatant lie, because this line comes from very, very sloppy statistics, as all stupid statistics do. So this comes from the fact that in 2021 to 2022, there were 70,330 rapes reported to the police, and of that, only 3.2% were prosecuted, or 2,223. And this even admits that the conviction rate was at 62%, which is higher than other serious crimes. When it comes to a conviction rate, rape is one of those ones where if you go to court, you're more than likely going to be found guilty of rape. But even there, it points out that 62% of 2,223 is 1,378 convictions, which is a conviction rate of about 2%. Sure, but there's a lot of context missing from that, which luckily it actually involves in this report. The total reports included historical allegations, which are usually harder to prove. Of course, if you report a rape soon after it has happened, it is more likely going to end up with a prosecution than any historical ones. I mean, bear in mind, 2021 to 2022, height of the Me Too movement, you're going to see a load of historical reports going in then. And even then, building up a criminal case, especially on something as serious as rape, can take an awfully long time, in some cases years. So you're not necessarily even going to see swift justice. And also I'd say bear in mind that according to the statistics from the Home Office of Outcomes Data for reported rapes to the police, as recently as 2020, 57% of people withdrew their support for cases. Now, there's a number of reasons they can do this. The police can probably say, look, we simply don't have enough evidence for this anymore. Or it could also be that these people were lying about the rape allegations and they won't get in any more trouble if they drop out now. There's a number of reasons for it. There's many stages in building up a rape case because it is a serious crime. And I'm not even saying we have a perfect system. I don't even know if we have a good system. But one thing I do know is that if you think that the reason we only have a 2% prosecution rate for rape in the UK is down to misogyny within the system, you are completely wrong. It's for quite a few reasons. One being a load of historical cases were brought up because of the Me Too movement. They're practically impossible to prove correct. There is a lot of victims voluntarily withdrawing their support for rape cases when it came to 2020 and beyond. And not only that, but bear in mind, between 2021 and 2022, we were still within a pandemic. The courts were still catching up with their huge backlog that they couldn't go through during the pandemic. In fact, most of the time, court was done through Zoom, so the efficiency of getting through these court cases and making these cases was completely slowed down. So if you're basing this 2% rapes are prosecuted statistic as a reflection of reality or of average, you are completely wrong. It is from a very unique time where, of course, prosecutions are going to go down. So it's ridiculous to try and blame a misogynistic system for that. Honestly, it annoys me.
That's not one that the girlies group chat can solve. But when police and prisons don't keep us safe, as they sadly clearly don't, we're organising to keep ourselves safe.
What? You just made the point before that you think trans women should be in women's jails. You made it out that the strawman arsonist guy was the one saying, oh, trans women shouldn't be in prison. Women are getting raped because of that. How can you bring up that point and then say this?
Women of all different races and backgrounds, cis and trans, old and young.
No, all these groups have a completely different idea of what should be done. That's why you're having such a civil war at the moment. I don't get it. In parts of this video you say, oh, I'm on Turf Island and people hate me for being trans. And then at the same time you're saying, oh, no, all sorts of feminists are coming together and sorting the issue out. What are you talking about? Why would you bring up women's prisons as the example to say cis and trans people are coming together to sort the issue out? No, that is the biggest issue between TERFs and radical trans activists. That's the defining, differing issue.
I'm also inspired by the British trans community. Our access to resources is often precarious. Things like healthcare, housing, employment, and food can be hard to get, so we share them. We know how to go around the institutions that gatekeep resources so we can get them ourselves.
Yes, I remember you saying in the NHS video that all trans people are, yes, you don't need to try and keep throwing them under the bus.
And this is a lesson we've learned in large part from black feminists, who in decades past and still organise their communities to get what they needed with their own hands.
I'd love to see what the example in the UK is, because all black feminists are doing these days is going along with BLM for a grift.
Above all else, our politics initially sprang from the shared belief that black women are inherently valuable, that our liberation is a necessity, not as an adjunct to somebody else's may because of our need as human persons for autonomy.
This is just a total word salad. What did any of that mean?
This may seem so obvious as to sound simplistic, but it is apparent that no other ostensibly progressive movement has ever considered our specific oppression as a priority or worked seriously for the ending of that oppression.
Right, I'm not putting you through any more of that word salad. This entire quote is literally just proving to me why progressives are always in a civil war with each other. Because there is always a fight to get one particular group to the top of that progressive stack. And if you're always trying to get to the top of a victim narrative, you're always going to have embarrassing conversations about it. Hence, I only get involved in the TERF versus trans debate to the degree that I do. It's just to say, look, the TERFs are clearly more correct, but I don't agree with them because I still hate men. Their whole narrative is that all trans women are just autogynephiliacs, i.e. men who get off on the idea of being women, and that's the more they can get away with, the more it gets them going, for lack of a better term. It's all just rooted in this constant man-hatred that you have seen throughout the feminist movements throughout the years. So I don't agree with them, but I'll only build bridges with them insofar as they will be willing to then, after we have helped them, open up and effectively not be ridiculous intersectionalists anymore, because they're still intersectionalists. They just think that cis women need to go above trans people. That's the only difference.
I became a woman, and then a man stole my work. Maybe that guy didn't steal my work because I'm a woman.
Why have you roundabouted this? Why would you bring that up before and then not delve on it? Oh, because you have to come up with a nonsense narrative to sell your video so that it gets 1 million views and you get money for it. You are a complete grifter. And I usually hate saying that word. I hate accusing others of being a grifter because I like to take them on good faith and take them seriously. But I can't take someone who admits that they lie to me and then undermines their own narrative constantly within a video seriously. I can't take them at their word because they can't keep their story straight. And so what could this possibly be for other than to make money?
I'm not going to name him because, without going into details, it all kind of worked out in the end.
Oh, so it's not to avoid libel laws anymore. It's because, oh, I don't really care because I've done better than him. See what I mean? There is no story to keep straight here. And I don't see why even naming this guy would negatively affect you in any way, unless it was a lie.
With a little bit of help from the girls' group chat. It changed the way that I look at my country, and that has felt like letting go of something. But by thinking through it in solidarity with other women, I've gained far more than I lost.
So, hang on. Let's just go through this whole thing again. Your whole narrative has been a lie, then. Your narrative was, oh, he stole my work, and that was a bad thing, and therefore I then went on a massive journey to find out how this affects women in other circles. You then do absolutely nothing about plagiarism throughout the video. It's just, the whole thing has just been about feminism. You've not even brought up women that should be paid for the work they do in their own house anymore. That was just a 2-minute bit. That's not been brought up again. Nothing about stolen wages there at all. You then lie about Roger Scruton for 10 minutes, and then you bring up fascism and completely lie about the BUS policies to make it seem like the suffragettes weren't after the same thing that modern feminists were, which, to be quite honest with you, they were, hence they all joined the BUF. But then at the end of all of this, all you have to say is, oh, yeah, he did steal my work, but I don't really care. And this is exactly why, by the way, because this whole thing was just an advert for Philosophy Tube's new film that he has written.
I learned an important lesson too, which is that I should probably just write my own movies. So I did.
The rest of the video is just a shill for that film. It's a shill for the new video hosting service Nebula. It's one that a bunch of BreadTube have got together and created because, again, capitalism's only good when they do it and they can pay their own bills. That's all this plagiarism arc has been about. A load of BreadTubers all released different videos about plagiarism, all to then say, oh, by the way, we've got Nebula, go find us over there. The H-Bomber guys seems to be the only one that actually tried to stick to the subject, and even then, as said earlier in this video, the Internet Historian part was absolutely dreadful. But hey, at least they can shill their own businesses from now on, I suppose. And hopefully they never come back to YouTube, they just stay over on Nebula. It stops the leftist claptrap being absolutely dribbled about the place here on YouTube. So there we have it. That was part 3 of me going through Philosophy Tube's absolutely dreadful video on plagiarism that had basically nothing to do with plagiarism. I don't even think any plagiarism actually took place in this entire ordeal. I think Philosophy Tube just wanted to get on the bandwagon, talk about some feminist issues, have a go at Roger Scruton, lie about the fascists, which the fascists are bad enough, I don't know why you have to lie about them, to only then say, actually, trans women are real women, guys, and then promote the film that, obviously, Philosophy Tube wrote. All of this turned out to just be a complete waste of time. It was literally just an hour-long advert for Philosophy Tube to say, I've written my own film, you'll be able to see it eventually, shill, 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 shill. But I felt like I had to go through this 4 hours of torture simply to point out that Philosophy Tube had nothing of value to say there, and as it turns out, was just there to shill Nebula and the film that Philosophy Tube wrote. So with that, I will not put you through any more leftism for the rest of the year, I think, especially none from YouTube. We'll be back to regular programming, obviously, next year. I have The Other Side of the Hill tomorrow, Regional Variations on Wednesday, and then no more streams probably till the 30th of December, which is the next Laughing at the Guardian, because I would like to spend Christmas with my lovely girlfriend and the rest of our families. And I hope you have a good Christmas too. I have no doubt I will be making another video this week to set you up for Christmas, but for now that is all I have for you today. So, once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.